Ahoy there, Captain Benzie here, coming at you with another beginner's guide for those of you getting started in EVE Echoes. Today we're going to be looking at tackling and electronic warfare, or EWar for short. Now ultimately what I mean by tackling is essentially blocking your opponent's movement, jumping, that kind of thing. We'll cover it more in detail in just a moment. Now before we jump in, I do just want to point out, around the bottom of the screen now, you should be seeing a load of my social media accounts. Of course, I love hearing your guys' comments and thoughts. I love chatting with you folks. Come chat with me in the comment section down below, ask me questions, suggest topics for videos, that kind of thing, and come and join me on Twitter, Facebook, all of that as well. I do love chatting, would love to get to know you all much better. Anyway, let's jump right in. There is a reason I've got a venture on screen now. I'm not just showing it off for the heck of it, but first things first, we're going to jump into market and start looking at what these different modules I'm talking about are and what they do. Now, most of them are mid-slots, so you're not going to cover these really until you start hitting the Tier 2 destroyers, cruisers, that kind of thing. Now, first things first, we're going to look at electronic warfare and sort of the tackle options that we have here. Now if I minimize these, you'll see that there are two types that are available on the market: status web and warp jammers. Now it's status web that we're going to look at first because this is a little bit simpler to understand. Now a status webifier, as it says at the bottom here, deep breath, reduces the maximum speed of a ship by employing micro-energy streams which effectively entangle the target temporarily, thereby slowing it down. It's literally that simple. You hit someone with a Mark III stasis webifier, you're going to slow them down by, as it says here, flight velocity bonus, minus 47%. You hit them with a stasis webifier, their ship slows down by 47%. That's a big slowdown. They're moving at half speed. And why is that important? Why is this something you might want to put on one of your ships? Well, ultimately, I like to have one of these on my stabber, simply because my stabber's turrets are fairly slow moving. Now, slow-moving turrets, a slow tracking speed, means I don't get to hit my enemy very often if they're fast-moving targets. If I hit someone with a Mark III stasis webifier, it means they're slower-moving. Slower-moving targets are easier to track, targets that are easier to track are easier to hit, and targets that are easier to hit are easier to destroy. It's really that simple. Now when you see here at the top it's got meta level is kind of just how powerful it is in relation to others. You'll see here that, for example, this particular one is meta level 1, and it's a flight velocity bonus of negative 47%. If you go up to the Mark V, it's meta level 2, and it's a minus 51% flight velocity bonus. Is it a huge difference? No, but it can make all the difference in combat. Those 4% slower can make it just that little bit easier to hit. Same here. 53% for a Mark VII stasis webifier at meta level 3, and so on and so forth. If you find that you're having difficulty hitting your target, either try orbiting from further away, but even then you may find that you're trying to orbit at a longer range, but they're just orbiting you at a close range. Hit them with a stasis webifier, slow them down, blow them out the sky. Simple as that. Now, warp jammers are a little bit more confusing, so we're going to go into a bit more depth on these. Now, if we look at a Mark III warp disruptor, what's important here stat-wise, again, other than its meta level, is its warp scramble strength. Now, if you imagine that every ship has a basic level of, like, a warp functionality of 1, call it 1, a warp scramble strength reduces that by 1, and if your ship ever hits 0, as it says here at the bottom, disrupts the target ship's navigation computer, disabling warping, jumping, micro-warp drives, and micro-jump drives. In short, if your ship is reduced to a warp strength of 0, you can't warp, you can't get out of combat. So if you're just sitting there in a Magnate or some other frigate that is a basic warp strength of 1, and I hit you with a warp disruptor with a warp scramble strength of 1, 1 minus 1 equals 0, you're blocked from warping. Now you'll see that as you go up the chains here, most of these will stay at warp scramble strength 1. The meta level is basically here. It's the power grid requirement and activation cost being reduced each time. You can see there the activation cost has gone down, it's duration of 5 seconds, warp scramble strength of 1, yada 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 yada, until we hit the Mark IX warp disruptor, which has a warp scramble strength of 2. Now why would anything need a warp scramble strength of 2? Well, that's simple. Ultimately some ships do have a warp strength built into them. Some of them you can then add to. If we scroll down here on the left hand side to low slot enhancements, and then down to thruster upgrades, we come down a little bit further. Here we have warp core stabilizers, warp scramble strength, and warp jammer strength bonus -1. This means if someone comes up to you with a warp jammer, with a strength of 1, the warp core stabilizer neutralizes their warp jammer down to 0, meaning you stay at your 1, if that makes sense. You've got this on your ship, someone hits you with a warp scramble strength of 1, this reduces their warp scramble strength to 0, so that they don't actually negatively affect your ship. It's kind of like armor plating for scramblers. Now obviously if you've got one of these on and someone comes up with a warp scrambler, like the Mark 9 one there that has a warp scramble strength of 2, they've got 2. This little device, this doohickey, will drop that warp scramble strength by 1, so they are now hitting you with a warp scrambler of strength 1. If you're still in a standard destroyer, that will still take you to 0, you will still be blocked from warping. So this looks like the kind of thing that, oh my goodness, I'm out in a venture, I don't want to have someone lock me in a mining field, what on earth can I do to, avoid them? I need to fit tons of these to stop. No, you never want to fit tons of these for starters. They don't stack individually, you kind of want to go up to something like here. You can see the different levels, ultimately just different activations, they're all there until you hit the Aura Warp Core Stabilizer. That does jam by 2. Those are, if you are absolutely paranoid that you're going to get jammed, you want to fit one of those on because it'll sort it out. But hey, let's have a look at that venture. I said there was a reason I had it currently docked, right? Let's look at its stats. Under the minor yield, we have +2 warp stability. This means you've got a standard warp stability on your ship of 1. A Venture 3 has a warp stability of +2, making for a total of 3. That means someone comes along with a Mark 9 Warp Disruptor. They drop it by 2. You're now still sitting at 1. You are not locked in place. Does that mean you're completely safe in a Venture 3? No one's ever going to lock you in position with a Warp Scrambler? No. If there's 2 ships, they can put 2 of those on and lock you down that way. So you do still have to be careful, you do still have to be wary, but it just means that you as a miner with your venture, you are less likely to be tackled. I don't know why I came into market, I wanted to go into my inventory, to my ship hangar. If we have a look at the Venture 1, the Venture 1 even has this, +2 warp stability right there. This means it is very hard for someone to lock a venture down using those warp disruptors. Now, of course, there are other forms of electronic warfare as well that we can look at, and I'm going to cover those now because some of these are some of my favourite things, especially for PvP. The 2 I want to look at now in the videos are energy neutralizers and energy Nosferatus. Now, curiously, if you try to type Nosferatu to someone in the in-game chat, it's a sensitive word and it gets blocked, but there it is right in the game. Who knows? Hey, energy vampires is another way that people refer to these, or just vamps or Nos. Now, these things we're going to cover second. We're going to look at the Neutralizer first of all. The Neutralizer is a straight up, it does what you think it would do. As it says here, neutralizes a portion of the energy in the target ship's capacitor. Neutralization amount, 60 gigajoules. Duration, 6 seconds. That takes a massive whack of 60 gigajoules out of their capacitor. Great. They now can't heal, they can't run things like armor repairers. You may have actually knocked their turrets offline if they've got a small enough capacitor. Obviously, the bigger these get, like the Mark 9 small energy neutralizer here, that drops as massive 68 gigajoules off their capacitor for 6 seconds, and so on. The trouble with these is they have a very small optimal range of about 4 kilometers, then an accuracy fall off of 2 kilometers. So at a total of 6 kilometers from someone, you are only going to be this is only going to be 50% effective. So ultimately, these are a great way if you want to go up. If your capacitor is absolutely fine and you have no capacitor issues of your own, you use a small energy neutralizer to whack their capacitor right down. This is especially effective against enemy ships that are trying to use EWar of their own, because you can just knock everything offline for them. Again, things like if you see someone is active shield tanking, whack them with the small energy neutralizer, and bang, there is nothing they can do to that. Down goes their capacitor, down goes their shield booster or their armor repairer or whatever, and all the damage you're doing now is not being repaired and going straight through. Now, the Nosferatu is kind of similar. It's not as effective as you'll see here. Energy transfer amount, 22 gigajoules. Again, the range is still very short on this. This is why my Thrasher, I've moved away from the howitzers and back down to the standard autocannons, just so I can be at that closer range. It's only 22 gigajoules, but notice it's an energy transfer. Yes, the Nosferatus, as I said, they're called energy vamps, energy vampires, and that's for a reason. They drain from your opponent's ship and add to your own. so you drop their capacitor by a smaller amount and increase your own. Now for me and my Thrasher, where I'm running an active tanking ship, again, watch my fitting video and you'll understand what I mean there on how I fit my Thrasher, and my tanking video for what I mean by active tanking. Ultimately, what I'm saying there is, I want to drop their capacitor a bit to make it harder for them to be running shield boosters or armor repairers, and instead I'm going to feed that into my own capacitor so that I can be running shield boosters and armor repairers. It's that simple. And ultimately those are the four sort of things I wanted to talk about here: warp jammers, energy Nosferatus, energy neutralizers, and stasis webifiers, and what those ultimately mean. Now if I jump back to my ships, I'm going to come out of my Venture 3 and set my Thrasher 2 as active, just to explain how I've got this equipped and why, when it comes to the EWar modules, I've got equipped the mid slots. So if we now jump into the fitting here, you'll see, I love that DPS, 270 DPS. Now I've got a stable capacitor as it is, but obviously when I put my energy boost, my shield booster on, that does start eating into my capacitor. It's the Mark V small shield booster. So I have a small energy Nosferatu. I will eventually upgrade this to one of the bigger ones there that just eats a little bit. But as soon as I activate that, if we have a look at its details here, 20 gigajoules if their capacitor goes out of theirs and into mine. I'm sitting at 4 kilometers there for that to be effective. Fortunately, when I go across to my autocannons, you'll see that their sort of optimal range is only 1.38, and the accuracy fall-off is all the way out at 8.51, so add those two together to get your proper 50% bracket. It's about 10 kilometers out. So if I'm sitting at 3 kilometers, I'm within optimal range for both the cannons and for my energy Nosferatu, and I'm just going to drain their capacitor, keep my shields going, and I can then also shove on that gyro stabilizer every time it's on cooldown, because I have enough capacitor in order to do so. So for me, that's what I do here. I use my small energy Nosferatu to keep this ship fed. Ultimately, that is a great setup for PvE. If you're going ratting, if you're going out doing combat anomalies, this is a great way just to make sure that your shields stay up. Now, I've also actually had a chance to fit some rigs onto this as well. I've got the core defense charge on there, and projectile collision accelerator just for the extra damage as well, because heck, why not? I love this ship so much. I blow up so many things. But if I was going to go out PvPing, well then yeah, I'm going to swap some of those bits around. Certainly if I jump across now to my stabber, and just pull that out of storage, here we are. I think I'm still saving for it. I don't remember if I actually equipped the thing or not, or if I'm still looking to buy it. Let's have a look. Close this all down and look into the stabber's fittings. Ah, there we are, no yes. I currently have, in the mid slot there, a Mark V warp disruptor. I went just to do a little bit of hunting for some guys in low sec and just trying this out and locking them down, but ultimately I normally have my suspend stasis webifier here locked on instead, simply because the tracking speed of the turrets here, if I scroll down, it's not great. It's 54.54. These are very slow tracking turrets. I do have a Marketeer tracking computer to help those turrets track a bit more, but a suspend stasis webifier also means, by having that fitted there, I can slow my target down by a whopping 57%, just to keep them that little bit easier to hit. And that keeps my stabber quite happily flying and actually hitting its targets. Now you see the stabber, I've got a little bit lower defense here than my Thrasher, but obviously it is a much more survivable ship, and ultimately this lower DPS comes from the fact that, one, I'm still using a civilian 425mm autocannon there, whereas I've got Mark V's there, just because these things are blasted expensive on the market, and I haven't got that fourth one yet, and also because, as I mentioned in my skills video, I don't have as many skills in the medium turrets. Anyway, that just about covers everything that I wanted to say in regards to EWar and tackle. This is just something that's worth looking into. There is a big part of tackling that I've not mentioned, and that is bubbles. We will cover those in another video because they are not in the game yet. They exist, sort of, in the game files. They're mentioned in other things and how to avoid them. Certain ships get bonuses to them, but they're not actually in the game and available to use just yet. So we'll cover that when those get added. Anyway, as usual, thank you all so much for watching. I love that so many of you guys actually stick around right to the end of these videos. It's hugely important to me that, you know, you guys are actually locked in on what I'm saying, that apparently I'm fairly interesting to some of you. I'm down with that. I'm down with that, thank you. If you do have any suggestions, if you've been playing through EVE Echoes and going, oh my goodness, I don't know what's going on, what on earth's all this about, there are two things you can do. Either jump down into the comment section below, ask me questions, suggest I make a video on something down there, I'll help. Otherwise, come add me in-game. Now, as you'll see here, I do have a lot of people come and talk to me quite frequently. Well, I say a lot. I do have people talk to me fairly frequently. I'm always happy to answer questions to the best of my ability, and I'm getting some great feedback from some people, talking with them and getting some ideas too. So yeah, suggest a video if you haven't seen what you want to see. Anyway folks, thank you ever so much for watching right to the end, happy sailing, and see you all in New Eden.